The sun hung over the neighborhood like a molten hammer, pressing down with a heat so heavy it seemed to silence everything it touched. Even the birds had given up pretending to be cheerful. They hid in the shade, wings half open, panting like tired dogs. Pavements shimmered, lawns crisped into yellow paper. And in the center of this suffocating afternoon, Keanu Reeves stepped out of his modest home wearing faded jeans, a loose gray t-shirt, and a look of genuine concern carved across his face. He wasn't thinking about fame today. He wasn't thinking about movies or martial arts or Hollywood. He was thinking about the elderly woman next door who had fainted earlier while trying to check her mailbox, and the two kids across the street who had been selling lemonade but shut down because the heat made their plastic cups melt like cheap wax. This wasn't normal weather. This was a crisis, and Keanu wasn't the kind who could watch people suffer while doing nothing. Inside his garage, dozens, no hundreds, of unopened water bottle cartons stood stacked like clear blue bricks. Keanu had bought them last month for a charity event, but the plans got delayed. Today, looking at them felt like staring at opportunity knocking. He rolled up his sleeves and began hauling the cartons out to his driveway, one after another, his breath steady despite the heat. Sweat dripped from his forehead, but he didn't slow down. He knew exactly what he was going to do. If people were going to be stuck in this brutal heat wave, he'd give them something simple and life-saving. Water. Free water. Something everyone deserved and almost no one had enough of recently because the stores were sold out and delivery trucks were delayed by the rolling blackouts. Keanu ripped open the first carton, pulled out a handful of chilled bottles, and set them neatly on a small folding table. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, a shimmering blue mountain of life sat in front of his home, catching the sunlight like tiny glass miracles. Word spread fast, faster than Keanu expected. A mailman was the first to approach, his uniform drenched and his hands trembling from dehydration. "Are these free?" he asked, almost embarrassed. Keanu didn't hesitate. "Take as many as you need, brother." The mailman wiped his forehead, grabbed 3, and whispered, "You have no idea how much this means." Soon after, an elderly couple shuffled over, leaning on each other for support. Parents carrying toddlers followed. Construction workers. Joggers. Teenagers looking overheated and scared. The kind of people who normally kept to themselves now gathered together, united by desperation, gratitude, and Keanu's quiet kindness. He didn't lecture them. He didn't brag. He just smiled, handed out water, and said, "Stay safe. Drink slowly. You're not alone." But in every peaceful moment, somewhere, someone was taking notes, literally. At the far end of the sidewalk stood Meredith Caldwell, the president of the Evergreen Meadows HOA. She was dressed in a crisp navy skirt suit despite the heat, her hair perfectly styled, her clipboard clutched in hands that shook, not from temperature, but from indignation. She watched Keanu distribute water with horror, as if he were committing a crime far more heinous than helping people survive a heat wave. Her lips pressed so tightly together they almost vanished. Every person who gratefully accepted a bottle made her scribble faster. Every smile Keanu gave made her jaw twitch. And when a group of kids cheered his name after getting fresh, chilled bottles, Meredith practically combusted on the spot. Keanu didn't notice her at first. He was too focused on the people. Too focused on the elderly man whose lips were cracked. Too focused on the mother begging for a second bottle for her crying baby. Too focused on making sure the neighborhood didn't collapse in this furnace of a day. But eventually, he caught a glimpse of Meredith's rigid posture, the deadpan glare, the unmistakable hostility radiating from her clipboard like a cursed artifact. He raised a hand in polite greeting. She didn't wave back. Instead, she marched toward him with sharp, clicking footsteps that sounded like tiny hammers striking the concrete. "Mr. Reeves," she said in a tone so cold it somehow cut through the heat. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Keanu looked at her, puzzled but calm. "Just keeping the neighborhood hydrated," he replied. "People need help." Meredith's eyes narrowed into slits. "This is unauthorized resource distribution," she announced, tapping her clipboard as if it were a judge's gavel. "You are violating HOA regulations, Section 14, Subsection C, regarding unapproved public amenities." Keanu blinked twice, trying to understand. "Ma'am, it's water." "Precisely," she snapped. "And you're giving it out for free. That creates liability. Disorder. encourages gathering, causes foot traffic, all prohibited. People around them murmured in anger and confusion, but Keanu remained collected. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for humanity. If helping people survive a heat wave is against the rules, Keanu said softly, maybe the rules need help too. Meredith stiffened, scribbling even more furiously. Expect a formal violation notice, she hissed, before storming away. Yet as she walked off, the crowd grew larger. People kept coming, and Keanu kept handing out water, refusing to let bureaucracy outweigh compassion. And unbeknownst to both of them, this small act of kindness was about to turn into the biggest neighborhood battle Evergreen Meadows had ever seen. By early evening, the heat hadn't broken, it had deepened. The sky glowed a bruised orange, and the air felt thick enough to chew. Even so, Keanu stayed at his little folding table, offering water with the same warm patience as he had that morning. The people who came now looked even worse. Flushed faces, shaky hands, heavy breaths. A few had driven from nearby blocks after hearing Keanu's giving out water for free. Just go, man, whispered across the neighborhood like a lifeline. But as the stream of grateful residents continued, a new sound cut through the heat-thick silence, the sharp metallic clang of something hitting Keanu's front door. He turned, puzzled, as a neon-orange envelope slid to the ground like a warning flare. It was wedged so aggressively into the doorframe that Keanu had to tug it free. The front read, in bold black ink, urgent HOA action required. A few neighbors gathered behind him, watching with concern as he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a multi-page violation notice printed on heavy paper, the kind of document that cared more about formality than compassion. The very top carried a dramatic heading, asterisk, notice of non-compliance, unauthorized resource distribution. Asterisk below it, in cold, clinical language, the HOA accused Keanu of turning his property into an unregulated hydration station, of causing disturbance due to heightened pedestrian traffic, and, bizarrely, of endangering community aesthetic harmony. There were citations, sub-citations, and penalties listed like a grocery list of punishments. But what startled Keanu wasn't the notice itself, it was the final page, a bill $4,200 in violation fees, due within 72 hours. They're charging you for giving out water during a heat wave. A man muttered from behind him. A mother shook her head in disbelief. This is insane. My baby was overheating. He helped us. And this is what they do. Keanu folded the notice carefully, not angrily, but with the solemnity of someone who'd seen a lot of unfairness in life and still chose kindness. It's all right, he told them softly. We'll figure this out. But the crowd didn't calm. If anything, their frustration grew. People weren't just hot. They were tired of rules that cared more about appearances than lives. And seeing Keanu punished for doing what the HOA should have been doing themselves lit a spark of unity among them. Meredith Caldwell reappeared moments later, walking briskly with two HOA board members who looked as miserable as the weather, but not nearly as stubborn as she did. She wore the same expression as earlier, tight-lipped, stern, humorless. Mr. Reeves, she announced loudly, as if addressing a courtroom instead of a melting cul-de-sac, you have officially been served. Continuing this unauthorized activity will result in escalated penalties, including, but not limited to, property inspections, increased fines, and possible legal review. She looked over the crowd with thinly veiled contempt. And all of you should disperse immediately. This gathering violates Section 5A, excessive public clustering. A teenage boy snorted. Lady, we're just trying not to die. Keanu stepped forward calmly, positioning himself between Meredith and the growing group of exhausted residents. Meredith, he said in the gentlest tone possible, people are getting sick out here. Some have nowhere else to go. Stores are sold out. Deliveries are delayed. There's a heat emergency. Surely the HOA can make an exception. Her eyes flashed. Exceptions lead to chaos. Rules exist to protect the community. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Protect us from what? Hydration. A faint ripple of laughter spread among the crowd, but Meredith wasn't amused. She thrust her clipboard toward him like a weapon. If you want to help, Mr. Reeves, do it within the guidelines. The guidelines don't mention heat waves, someone shouted. Or compassion, another added. Meredith ignored them. Pack up the water, she ordered firmly. Now, there were moments in Keanu's life when he wanted to fight, on screen, or in training, or when injustice pressed so hard he felt it echo in his bones. But this wasn't one of those moments. Instead, he exhaled slowly and nodded. "All right," he said. The crowd groaned. Meredith smirked. "However," Keanu added, lifting the penalty notice, "I'd like a formal meeting with the board. Tonight." Meredith's smirk vanished. "Tonight." "Yes," Keanu answered. "If you're going to fine me for saving lives, the least you can do is hear why I did it." The crowd murmured in approval. Meredith hesitated. She didn't like being challenged, especially not publicly, but with half the neighborhood watching, she couldn't refuse without looking heartless. "Fine," she said sharply. "Board meeting. 1 hour. But don't expect sympathy." As she walked off again, the tension hung in the air like the heat itself, thick, oppressive, waiting to explode. Neighbors offered Keanu water now, as if symbolically returning the kindness he'd given them. Someone patted his shoulder. "Thank you for standing up for us, man." Another said, "We'll be at that meeting." Keanu smiled humbly. "Let's just talk it out. That's all we need." But as he packed up the remaining bottles, he knew deep down that this battle wasn't going to be solved with simple conversation. Not with Meredith. Not with an HOA obsessed with rules over humanity. This heatwave had revealed something much bigger, and tonight's meeting would decide what burned next. As the sun finally dipped beneath the rooftops, the heat didn't fade. It seemed to settle into the neighborhood like a heavy, hot blanket. Porch lights flickered on. Ceiling fans buzzed in overworked desperation. But despite the suffocating air, more than 50 neighbors gathered outside the Evergreen Meadows Community Hall, whispering anxiously and fanning themselves with whatever they could find. The hall, usually used for dull meetings about shrub heights and fence paint shades, now felt like the setting of a showdown. And when Keanu arrived, quiet, humble, carrying a small folder of notes instead of anger, the crowd parted for him like he was stepping into a battle he never asked for but wouldn't walk away from. Inside, the community hall was a furnace. The air conditioning unit had failed that afternoon, and the HOA hadn't bothered fixing it yet. Sweat clung to faces. Plastic chairs stuck to people's backs. At the front of the room, the HOA board sat behind a long table, their papers neatly stacked, their expressions equally stiff. Meredith Caldwell sat in the middle, perfectly upright despite the heat, her blazer still buttoned as if she were immune to temperature itself. Beside her sat Harold Briggs, the vice president, a nervous man who looked like he wished he were anywhere else, and Cynthia Greer, the treasurer, who was already annoyed at the number of people attending, more than she liked dealing with. Their eyes tracked Keanu as he approached the speaker's table, some filled with resentment, some with curiosity. Meredith cleared her throat sharply. "This emergency session of the Evergreen Meadows Homeowners Association is now in order," she announced. "Tonight, we will address the violation committed by resident Keanu Reeves regarding unauthorized resource distribution and the disturbance it caused." She glanced at the crowd. "We ask that attendees remain silent and orderly." A hand shot up immediately, but she ignored it. Another followed, but she slammed her gavel. Silence. The room simmered. Keanu stood up slowly, his voice gentle even in tension. "Thank you for meeting on short notice," he began. "I know today has been hard for everyone. The heat wave has put people at risk, especially our elderly neighbors, our kids, and anyone working outdoors." He paused to glance toward the front row, where the elderly couple from earlier sat fanning themselves desperately. "I gave out water because people needed help. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about saving lives." Cynthia scoffed. "Hyperbolic." The elderly man in the front row raised a hand weakly. "Ma'am," he said, "my wife fainted at noon today. Keanu gave her water before the ambulance came." Cynthia looked away, shame flickering only for a second before she masked it with indifference. Keanu continued, "If the HOA had a heat emergency plan, I would have followed it. But there isn't one. And when the power went out earlier, more people became vulnerable." He opened his folder, showing temperature reports and emergency alerts he'd printed. Meredith didn't even look. "Mr. Reeves," she said in an icy tone, "rules exist to keep order. When you take it upon yourself to distribute resources, you create chaos." Crowds. Liability. Risk. You undermine the HOA's authority. Keanu nodded gently. I understand your concerns about liability. I really do. But in extreme conditions, compassion has to come before protocol. The room erupted in murmurs, agreement mixed with frustration. Harold shifted uncomfortably. Maybe, he whispered toward Meredith, we should consider revisiting the emergency guidelines. She shot him a glare sharp enough to silence him instantly. We are not revising anything because an actor decided to play hero, she snapped. The crowd gasped. A teenager stood up. He is a hero. Meredith slammed the gavel. Sit down or you will be removed. Keanu raised a calming hand. Please, he said softly, no hostility. We are neighbors. Meredith exhaled through her nose like a dragon trying not to breathe fire. Mr. Reeves, unless you can provide a compelling legal reason for your actions, the fines will stand and further violations will result in escalated consequences. She leaned back, certain she'd cornered him, but Keanu only nodded slowly, then pulled out a small, folded paper from his folder. Actually, he said gently, I do have something. The board members stiffened. I spoke with a first responder this afternoon, Keanu continued, and he reminded me of a regulation in the state's emergency response guidelines. He unfolded the paper, smoothing it with care. During officially declared heat emergencies, like the one we're in now, residents are legally permitted to provide basic necessities to those in immediate risk, including water, shade, and cooling, without requiring permits or HOA approval. Gasps rippled through the room. Meredith's face tightened. That can't be accurate. Keanu handed the paper to Harold, who read it, swallowed hard, and nodded. It's real, he whispered. State law overrides HOA regulations in emergencies. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in relief. People clapped. A few cheered. Someone shouted, finally, sense. Meredith banged the gavel again and again, but no one listened this time. Her control was slipping, her authority cracking. Her voice, once sharp, now sounded strained. Order, order, but it was too late. Keanu hadn't embarrassed her. He hadn't attacked her. He had simply brought truth, and the truth was a force even she couldn't gavel away. And as the noise filled the hot room, something shifted. The neighborhood wasn't just supporting Keanu, they were standing up for themselves. The board meeting should have ended there, with relief, applause, and a neighborhood finally united after hours of blistering heat. But Meredith Caldwell was not someone who accepted defeat gracefully. As the cheers grew louder, her fingers tightened around her clipboard until the edges bent. Her jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched beneath her cheekbone. She stared at Keanu as though he were personally responsible for the collapse of every rule she'd spent years obsessively enforcing. And while the crowd laughed, clapped, and congratulated one another, Meredith stood up with a stiff, robotic motion that silenced the nearest rows instantly. This meeting, she hissed sharply, is not over. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade dipped in ice. Gradually, people quieted, exchanging uneasy glances. Meredith straightened her blazer, still impossibly crisp despite the heat, and addressed the room with a voice dripping with venomous control. While state emergency guidelines grant residents temporary leniency, she began, emphasizing temporary, they do not excuse actions that cause disruption, liability risks, or violations of community standards. She pointed her pen at Keanu as if accusing him of treason. Mr. Reeves still broke HOA rules. Keanu stayed calm, though the tension pressed on him like the heat outside. Meredith, he said softly, the guidelines override the rules during the emergency. That's all I was trying to explain. But Meredith wasn't listening. She wasn't interested in legalities anymore. She wanted revenge. This board, she declared, will therefore issue a secondary notice for disturbance, unauthorized gatherings, and excessive foot traffic. Gasps rippled through the hall. Additionally, she continued, we will conduct a full property inspection of Mr. Reeves's home tomorrow morning. Even her own board members blinked in shock. Harold mouthed silently, tomorrow? Why? Cynthia shifted, uncomfortable, but remained silent. Keanu blinked, stunned not by the threat, but by her sheer determination to punish him for doing the right thing. Before he could respond, a woman from the back row stood up. "Are you serious right now?" she shouted. "My daughter had heat exhaustion. You weren't out there handing out water. He was." Another neighbor shouted, "You're punishing him because you didn't do anything." Someone else added, "We pay fees for safety. Where was the HOA during the blackout?" Meredith banged the gavel repeatedly. "Silence, all of you." But the room had reached its breaking point. The heat, the dehydration, the fear, and now this attack on the one person who helped them. They weren't having it. Keanu, sensing the rising anger, held up his hands. "Everyone, please, let's stay calm." His voice had the same gentle steadiness that comforted people earlier that day. Slowly, the shouting faded. People sat down again, not because of Meredith's authority, but because Keanu asked them to. He turned back to her. "If you want to inspect my property," he said, "you're welcome to. I have nothing to hide." Meredith smirked, mistaking his calm for defeat. "Good," she said sharply. "The inspection will proceed at 9 a.m. sharp, and if any violations are found, any at all, we will escalate enforcement accordingly." The threat hung thick in the air. But then something unexpected happened. Harold, the timid vice president, cleared his throat. Meredith, I don't think a property inspection is." "Quiet," she snapped. But Harold didn't quiet. He looked around the room, seeing the fear and frustration on his neighbors' faces. Real people suffering while the HOA prioritized rules over lives. For the first time, he found his courage. "No, we need to say this," he said, voice trembling but determined. This isn't right. We're supposed to help the community, not punish people who step up when we don't." Cynthia shifted again, nodding reluctantly. "He's right," she added. We didn't do anything today. And Mr. Reeves did." The room held its breath. Meredith stared at her board in disbelief, betrayal flickering through her eyes. "You're siding with him," she whispered, horrified. "You're undermining me." "We're not undermining you," Harold said gently. "We're trying to do what's fair." The crowd murmured in support. Keanu didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He simply gave Harold a grateful nod. But to Meredith, that nod was the final blow. Her face darkened, her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "Fine," she spat. "If that's how everyone feels, this meeting is adjourned." She slammed the gavel so hard the handle cracked. Meredith stormed out of the hall, her heels echoing like gunshots. But as the slam of the door faded, the heat didn't feel quite as heavy anymore. Neighbors surrounded Keanu, offering thanks, support, and encouragement. Harold approached him too, shyly. "I'm sorry for how she acted," he said. "We'll sort this out. Tomorrow doesn't have to be a fight." Keanu smiled kindly. "Thank you. We'll figure it out together." But as everyone walked back into the hot night, none of them saw Meredith standing outside under a street lamp, gripping her cracked gavel like a weapon. Her eyes narrowed with icy resolve. She wasn't done. Not even close. The next morning arrived with no mercy. The sun rose like a burning coin, blazing down on evergreen meadows before most people were even awake. By 8 a.m., the temperature had already climbed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the asphalt shimmered with heat mirages. But despite the scorching conditions, dozens of residents were already gathered on Keanu Reeves's front lawn. Some carried folding chairs, others clutched umbrellas for shade. A few held signs that read, "Let compassion lead," "HOA is not equal to heartless," and the most popular one, "Thank you, Keanu." The neighborhood had made its choice. Today wasn't just about one man being punished. It was about standing up for the right thing. Inside his home, Keanu prepared calmly, sipping a glass of water as he glanced through the curtains. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't angry. He was simply ready. Ever since yesterday, he'd sensed that this wasn't really about hydration or rules. It was about what kind of community these people wanted to be. So when the crowd spotted him stepping onto his porch, they erupted in applause, not because he was a movie star, but because he had been there when they needed him most. Keanu gave them a small, grateful smile. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "Let's just keep things peaceful today." The crowd nodded. They trusted him. At exactly 9 a.m., a silver HOA-branded SUV rolled down the street like an armored vehicle approaching enemy territory. Meredith Caldwell stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses, a perfectly pressed blouse, and an expression colder than the ice packs people had been desperately using overnight. Behind her were Harold and Cynthia, looking far less confident than usual. Meredith marched forward with a clipboard in hand, her heels clicking decisively even on melting pavement. But when she reached Keanu's walkway and saw the wall of neighbors standing firmly beside him, her steps faltered. She was expecting compliance. Maybe fear, but certainly not an entire community united against her authority. "Mr. Reeves," she said sharply, "we are here to conduct your property inspection." Keanu nodded. "Of course. You're welcome to look around." He stepped aside, giving them an open path to the house. But as Meredith moved forward, Harold gently touched her arm. "Wait," he murmured. "We should talk first." She brushed him off. "No, we proceed by protocol." But when she tried to take another step, a voice from the crowd rang out. "We're coming too." Dozens of heads nodded in agreement. Meredith spun around. "Absolutely not. Inspections are private. Not today," an elderly woman interrupted. "If you're going to target him, you can do it in front of all of us." Another neighbor added, "We want transparency. No more hidden punishments." Meredith's jaw tightened. She looked trapped, boxed in by her own community. Still, she pressed on. "Fine," she said through clenched teeth. "Follow if you must." She led her board toward the entrance, scribbling on her clipboard dramatically as if preparing for war. She examined the porch, touching the railing for dust that wasn't there, checked the flower beds, squinted at a tiny leaf on the walkway as if it were a code violation. Each time she wrote something down, the crowd groaned. But as she rounded the corner to the backyard, expecting to find clutter or improper storage, she froze. Instead of chaos, she found shade canopies, water coolers, misting fans someone had donated overnight, and folding chairs arranged neatly for anyone needing relief from the heat. The setup wasn't messy, it was organized, safe, community-focused. Even better, Keanu had installed a temporary sign near the fence that read, "Emergency Cooling Station, authorized under state heatwave guidelines." Harold and Cynthia exchanged looks. This wasn't a violation. This was leadership. Harold whispered, "Meredith, we can't punish him for this." She didn't react. Her pen hovered in the air, trembling with frustration. The neighbors watched, waiting to see what she would do. Finally, she snapped. Her clipboard dropped to her side. "Fine," she balked. "No violations. No fines. Is that what you all want?" The crowd murmured, confused. Her voice wavered, but not with fear, with exhaustion. "Do you think I enjoy being the bad guy? I'm trying to keep order. Structure. That's my job." For the first time, her voice cracked. "But none of you want rules anymore. You want exceptions." She looked at Keanu, not with anger now, but something like defeat. "And you, everyone listens to you. They look at you like a hero. How am I supposed to lead if no one respects the system?" Keanu stepped forward gently. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't lecture. "Meredith," he said softly, "leadership isn't about enforcing rules. It's about knowing when people need help and stepping up. Yesterday wasn't about rebellion. It was about survival." The crowd nodded in agreement. Even Cynthia looked touched. Harold added quietly, "Maybe it's time the HOA listens to the community, instead of controlling it." Meredith stood still, breathing hard, her rigid posture finally softening. Slowly, she removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were tired. She looked around at the neighbors, the same people she'd tried to protect with rules. The same people who were now asking for understanding instead of strictness. After several long seconds, she sighed. "Fine," she murmured. "We'll form a heat emergency task group with community volunteers." Someone cheered. Another clapped. Within seconds, the whole crowd erupted in applause, not for her, but for the small step toward change. Meredith turned back to Keanu. "And the previous notices will be voided." The crowd cheered louder. Keanu smiled warmly. "Thank you. That means a lot." As the tension finally dissolved, neighbors rushed to shake Keanu's hand, hug him, thank him again and again. The cooling station buzzed with activity as people set out snacks, cold towels, and water. Children laughed under misting fans. Elderly neighbors were guided to seating. And for the first time in Evergreen Meadows, people felt connected, not by rules, but by humanity. Keanu watched the scene unfold with a calm, humble smile. He hadn't wanted a fight. He'd only wanted to help. And in the end, that simple intention had changed the entire neighborhood. The heat wave still scorched the community. But thanks to him, thanks to their unity, it no longer felt unbearable. It felt like hope.